All right. Well,
Sounds good.
welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for another wonderful water issues talk. Today we are happy to have Arden Sasak with us. She is a Minnesota Green Corps member with the MPCA, and she is working on the We Are Water Minnesota program as well as the chloride reduction program. And so she will be presenting about her service term at the MPCA with those two programs, where she focuses on community engagement and outreach programming. She'll share about the impact of her work in these programs and how both programs work towards protecting water in Minnesota, as well as what insights she's gained from her service at the agency. Arden is a Green Corps member working with those two programs, and much of her work includes developing and implementing programming on water-related topics such as soil health and chloride reduction, creating exhibit content for We Are Water Minnesota's traveling exhibit, and connecting with communities across Minnesota around water. She is a recent graduate of St. Olaf College, where she held multiple community outreach positions and is looking to continue working to support communities around environmental and social issues after her Green Corps member term ends next month in August. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Arden, to share your great work with us. And I will just say it has been absolutely wonderful getting to know and working with Arden over these last almost a year now. So I have greatly appreciated her time and her personality as well. So thank you, Arden, and go take it away.
Thank you so much, Brooke. Oh, that was really nice. At least that last bit where you talked about that. And then thank you all for just showing up in general. It's just, it's kind of one of those things where I haven't really talked about my work in its full capacity really at all. And so, it's great to have this opportunity to present to other people at the PCA who may not be familiar with some of the work I do, especially since so much of what I do is pretty different than what the PCA does as in general. So I'm gonna start off with a little bit of a story. So I'm gonna just do actually an introduction about Minnesota Green Corps. So and the organization's a part of. So I am currently a Minnesota Green Corps member, and so the Minnesota Green Corps program, which is facilitated by the MPCA, it's an AmeriCorps program that aims to preserve and protect Minnesota's environment while training a new generation of environmental professionals. So at least for me, as someone who's early career in the environmental industry, this was a program that would help me gain experience based on based on my skills that I have in order to get more into the environmental field. So currently, I am specifically a community readiness and outreach member, so my work primarily focuses on public engagement and education. And so as I mentioned earlier, so even though the program is facilitated by the MPCA, I'm specifically also with the MPCA as my host site. And I am working as a part of the two education programs, We Are Water in Minnesota, and then the chloride reduction specifically with the smart salting trainings. I primarily work within the We Are Water program, so most of my presentation is going to be talking about that. But so the We Are Water Minnesota program is a traveling exhibit and community engagement program that emphasizes building relationships between people and water through the interdisciplinary exploration of science, history, and personal story. The Smart Salting program, on the other hand, is a training program so that aims to reduce chloride pollution while keeping roads, parking lots, and sidewalks safe. And so my work within the Smart Salting program, which I do heavily with Brooke and Shandy, is that I provide a workshop that I offer in partnership with We Are Water called Smart Salting for Community Leaders, which I'll be talking more about later. And okay. But again, like I mentioned before, I wanted to start off with a little bit of a story. So this is a picture of the We Are Water exhibit in Fergus Falls last year in September 2022. So this was at the Fergus Falls Public Library. And what happened was that I think the first week that I started with Green Corps, what happened was that I had to go up to Fergus Falls because we had our We Are Water opening retreat. And so this was pretty important as an important starting point as part of my service term with Green Corps because I was meeting all of our host site partners. So we work with multiple different communities across the state of Minnesota. So I was meeting all of them at once who would be hosting the exhibit in 2023. And I was also meeting a lot of the partners for We Are Water from all the different state agencies that are part of We Are Water. So I was basically meeting pretty like a good chunk of all the people I was going to be forming relationships and working closely with over the course of my GreenCorps term. And so I show up to Fergus Falls, and what happened was that I was told I had to introduce myself and I needed to share a water story with the entire group. So, again, as part of the program, we collect stories from all over the state of Minnesota from community members from each of our host sites. And when I was told I needed to tell a water story, I was like, oh my God, what do I say? And what do I say that, like, what do I share that's authentic to me? And so there's a lot of different stories I could choose from. So, for example, I grew up in Illinois and I lived really pretty close to Lake Michigan. And I have a lot of fond memories about Lake Michigan. I could talk about that. Um, some of my other key memories was I went to France as a teenager for a study abroad trip, and I spent a lot of time along the Atlantic Ocean. So that could be another memory. I also went to college in Northfield, Minnesota, and much of my time in Northfield, Minnesota was with related to the Cannon River, which flows through the town. And one of my favorite memories was watching people fish by the dam over there. So I could talk about that. But there was one story that really stuck out to me in my mind as I was in the probably about 10 minutes I had to mentally prepare for this. And so I think it's probably because it's a little bit morbid if I'm talking about that. So I wanted to share with you all the story that I told to a bunch of people in Fergus Falls who I'd be working with for the next year. So, for context, I grew up in the northwest suburbs of Chicago, and I went to high school in a town called Park Ridge, Minnesota. So it's labeled on the map, I think, kind of smack in the middle of that river. So it goes from Wisconsin all the way down through the suburbs of Chicago and eventually joins the Illinois River. And so, growing up where I did, it was really close to where I lived. And so, my senior year of high school, I was really lucky enough to be taking an advanced environmental science class as part of my coursework. And what happened was that for one of our class periods, we were going to be doing a little lab where we would test two different bodies of water for water quality, just some simple tests like nitrates, things like that, like turbidity. And so thankfully, we had two different bodies of water nearby. So there was a retention pond, as you can see on the map, that was right in front of the high school. And then we also were really close to Des Plaines River. So you can see, like, just you cross the street and then you just go through the woods and you end up at the river. Fairly easy. And so what happened was that my teacher decides to do this not just without warning us to get prepared for our clothes, but then also to do it kind of quite possibly the most miserable day of the year. And so it was really cold. And what happened was that everything was dead. It wasn't super pleasant. And I didn't have a proper coat. It was about 35, 40 degrees. So I was wearing a Snuggie to go out and collect water. So we go and do at the retention pond. We go over to Des Plaines River. We're like all getting muddy because we have to go down to the riverbed and collect the water. And, as we were getting ready to leave, my teacher goes, stop, 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 like really dramatically. And we're just like, what's wrong with you? We need to go back to the school because we're all freezing. And so what happened was that he's like, I have really something important to tell you. Um, we were like, okay, what is it? He's like, this is where the last victim of serial killer John Wayne Gacy was found. So we're all just like, and then he goes cheerfully after that. He's like, okay, time to go. And so then we head back. And we're just like, what is wrong with this man? Why would he bring us here? Blah, 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 blah. But, I did some research about that and I found out that was a complete lie. So, well, there was some truth to it where victims of the serial killer were found in the river. They were found much further downriver, so closer to the like the west suburbs and south suburbs of Chicago, not where we were living, even though so it was something where it was interesting, at least why that memory stood out to me, and how years later I went back and researched, okay, was that actually true or not? And I think it just reminds, at least me, especially after hearing all these stories that I've heard from all the different communities that we work with through We Are Water, that, a lot of people have really positive memories around water, but there's also a lot of maybe sadness and fear around water. And so that was, I think, what stuck out to me compared to maybe some of my other stories that were generally either more happy or neutral. It was almost a like funny slash almost negative memory that stuck out with me. And so, at least when it comes to listening to the water stories, being open and, you have to be open and empathetic to all the stories that you hear. And the fact is that so many of the stories that are told are from people from very different backgrounds to me and very different walks of life and experiences of me. So being able to keep an open mind when working with We Are Water, both within person and also making sure that when we're working with the content and making sure that each of our iterations of the exhibit and the program are representative of the community we're in. So I'm going to move on and talk more about the specific structure of the program We Are Water. And so this is going to be a little bit more technical. So hopefully this is not too much of a repeat for people who are familiar with We Are Water. So again, to reiterate, We Are Water Minnesota is a traveling exhibit about our relationships with and to water and also stewardship of the water. And so again, we emphasize building relationships between people and the interdisciplinary explorations of science, history, and personal story around water. And so the overarching goal of We Are Water is to build community capacity within local communities throughout Minnesota to support and engage in water restoration and protection. And so when we talk about our host site communities, we work with a lot of like organizations that are like soil and water conservation districts, but we often are working with communities and host sites that are not explicitly water related, or they don't do any of the regulatory, or they don't do a lot of the water stewardship. So oftentimes we are working with libraries, we are working with museums, we are working with cultural institutions that are not directly working with water. And so oftentimes when we're trying to think about how to build this local capacity and support, we're working with people who are not maybe in the typical realm of water regulation and management in here. A lot of times they are, but a lot of times we aren't. I can also talk about that more with our current We Are Water host site partners who I've been working with for the past year. And so again, with the funding for We Are Water, so we are part of Minnesota's Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment. And so we are funded through that, and that was voted publicly by Minnesotans in 2008. And we are supported by a network of partners. So actually, our lead partner for We Are Water is not the MPCA, even though we do probably are like the second lead partner. It's actually the Minnesota Humanities Center. And so we are also supported by the Minnesota Historical Society, University of Minnesota Extension, the McKnight Foundation, and board. And then here for the state agencies, we're supported by Bowser, Department of Health, Department of Natural Resources, and Department of Agriculture. So there's a lot of people who on the state partner side really have a hand in the program. And so when we're talking about our outcomes of the program, so we are kind of a social science based program. And so we're often like working on developing success in the program through this community capacity model, which is from Davenport and CCAMP. So I got the pleasure of meeting that May Davenport at a event back in January. And it was really interesting hearing about her work with this model and how it's still being utilized with We Are Water. And so this model really helps us understand the role of individual, relational, organizational, and community and programmatic capacities in order to empower people and engage with communities in clean water. So this model was specifically designed with watershed projects in mind. And so what happened was that this model, we were able to design the We Are Water program around this model and think about, okay, like how can this program work on all of these levels? And so again, with many education programs, it focuses on the individual capacities of, visitors or students or adults who see the program. But then, we want to model and design the program from these additional capacities. And so it really helps us to delve into community work a little bit deeper and think about what success looks like in a variety of capacities that are legitimate. So there's three main components of We Are Water Minnesota. And so our first one is we have a partnership network. And so each of our host sites, so we as a group of state partners, we recruit host sites. And so right now we are recruiting host sites right now. We're going to be starting interviews in August for our 2024 cohort. And so we use the partnership network. So we encourage our host sites to build partnerships in order to develop the exhibit and then also with hosting. So using We Are Water as an opportunity to connect with people in their community and to especially to form new partnerships. We also have the traveling exhibit. And so this exhibit travels all across the state of Minnesota. and it usually stays with a host site for about 6 to 8 weeks, approximately for each host site, and then it switches on to the next. And so it's usually traveling for most of the year. So currently it's actually in Minneapolis, which I'll talk about later. But again, each of our host sites has the responsibility of hosting the exhibit for a set amount of time, which is determined as they are chosen for the cohort. And then finally, we have public events. So people for We Are Water host site partners are required to have a minimum of 4 public events. Well, 4 events, and one of them has to be a water stewardship event. So that's part of where I end up doing my work, is through that. And again, we are, the end goal of this is that we're kind of been trying to encourage, responsibilities to and relationships with water. And so when I talk about the partnership network, so we have the state level partners here in the center. And so that's part of where I'm part of. And then where other staff members, so like Britt Gangnes, who is my supervisor here at the PCA, she's part of this. All of our other host site partners from the Humanities Center, DNR, et cetera, are at the state levels. So each of our host sites are part of this network where they work with us and help us. We work together to develop the exhibit, figure out what are their major goals, and helping them host their events. And then finally, what happens is our hosts make their own partnerships. And so oftentimes we're encouraging our host sites to create new partnerships or to strengthen pre-existing partnerships. And again, especially since We Are Water is temporal, we only work with our host site partners for a set amount of time. This is really important because, if the partnerships are going to outlast the how long we're going to be in the community and how long we're working with the community itself. So again, that's why we really emphasize creating, strengthening and creating new partnerships, and they may not have the opportunity to do so, otherwise. And so another thing that we do is, this is from the Minnesota Humanities Center. And so we have 4 major principles that we guide our work for, especially when we are encouraging our host site communities to think about their exhibit content, who they're going to choose to interview, et cetera. And so one is that we build and strengthen relationships. That's on the right side. And so building and strengthening relationships from the Minnesota Humanities perspective is by listening to authentic narratives and voices. And so when these stories are shared, listened to, and understood as essential parts of an experience that makes up each of us and our communities, so we can build the foundations for these long-lasting partnerships and meaningful community programming. We also have recognize this power story and the danger of absence. So what happens is that it's important to consider who is being represented in a community and who is not, and why is that the case. And so having the multiple narratives, including ones that, have traditionally been absent, helps form deeper relationships within the communities. The next principle we have, which is on the left, is learning from and with multiple voices. And so learning about the communities involves knowing the who's, what's, where's, and when's. So learning from and with the communities involves examining our own ways of being and knowing, and also being open and accepting to other ways that may be true as well. So accepting multiple truths. Listening to each other's water stories can be one way of doing that. So that was, going back to the Fergus Falls, where we all listened to our water stories together and worked with that. And then lastly, and most importantly, so we have to amplify community solutions for change. So after these relationships have been built and stories have been learned, so these different ways of knowing, how can we incorporate the understandings that have been built and the resources that the community has into long-term success and goals with water? And so success is going to look really different depending on the community and what their goals are with hosting We Are Water. And so we're aiming to continue the program and keep making sure it travels statewide. So we started having the exhibit publicly in 2016, 2017. And so we're going to be hitting 30 communities this year in 2023. So currently the exhibit is in Minneapolis, which is being hosted by the Somali Museum of Minnesota at Augsburg. But just in 2023, we've traveled a lot of different places in Minnesota. So after in Minneapolis, it's going to go really far up north to Rosa, Minnesota. Before it came to Minneapolis, I was in Pine River, which is north of Brainerd. it was in Becker recently, which was in the Mississippi St. Cloud watershed. So that was part of St. Cloud, Monticello, that area of the state. And so again, when you're going traveling to all these different places, you get to hear all these different stories about like, okay, what's going on with the water? Because a lot of these places are pretty different in terms of what kinds of water stories they share, what are the community priorities, and what are what's happening with the water really does vary as you travel across the state, depending on the geography, especially depending on the geography and like businesses and communities there. So from our 2022 host sites, so here's some data from our 2022 evaluation report. And so, there was 104 partnerships that were pursued last year, and 63 of those partnerships were new or recently or new. Over 28,000 people came to see the exhibit between all 5 of the host sites. And then there was a total of 4,660 visitors who participated in 69 events and activities over the course of that year. And we also, as part of the exhibit, so you can see on this left picture, there's a map with the with some like pages on there. So those are stories that people can share on the on our map that we have at each host site. We also have something called water drops where people can share one way they're going to protect water. And so 518 of those were shared over the course of that year. So again, just really big impact overall between as we travel. We get to see like hundreds of thousands of people since the program have started had seen the exhibit, and we're always constantly working on improving the exhibit. So I want to talk a little bit more. Again, this is just an overview of the We Are Water program, and I want to talk more specifically about what I do and kind of like some of the gears that make the program run. And so with each We Are Water host site, we are preparing exhibit content. And so 25 to 30% of the exhibit content is brand new every time we move the exhibit because we customize so much of the content to the host sites. And so a lot of work goes into it, and that's something that I'm a part of. And so this is a picture that of me in Pine River, which was our second host site. And one of the things I do is that I work on the inspiration stories, which is part of the local content. So that is a picture that my mom took with our dog because that nonprofit that we worked with allows dogs in their building, which is really fun. But yeah, and so preparing for each exhibit is really a months-long process that often we're meeting with our host sites, we're working with a lot of our partners and making this happen. So first of all, we have to onboard everyone. So that was what we did in Fergus Falls last year. But then we have to help our host sites, pick a physical host site, pick a physical site to have the exhibit. So most of the time, a lot of our organizations can host it where they're at, but like sometimes we have to figure out, okay, like if they don't have the space, where do we put it? So for Somali Museum, they didn't have the physical room in their museum space to host the exhibit. And so we worked with Augsburg University, and that was a long process to be able to have the exhibit at Augsburg. And so that's something we often have to do early on. Before they're hosting the host site will have to choose community members to be interviewed by our interviewer, Leah Lem. And so oftentimes we're thinking about the absent narratives approach with how they choose the interviews. And then also what happens is that these community members are interviewed once they get selected based on the absent narratives approach and getting an array of narratives that really encompass the community as a whole. And then so the interviews are some of them are edited for features and get sent to us. And so when we get the interviews, oftentimes what we're doing is that we have to prepare the local content for each exhibit. So there's a lot of different pieces that we work on where I work on the inspiration stories. Other members of our group work on local content, etc. All the state partners recently started working on updating all of our existing pieces that stay consistent through each host site. So we're updating those. And then again, we have to do the design process. So once the content is written, we are often working with designers at the MPCA Communications Department or with the DNR and other members to get our exhibit panels like designed, edited, printed, and making sure that they are prepared in time for as we move the exhibit. And then, of course, we have to move the exhibit. That's usually a multi-day process, so it takes about 6 hours to install the exhibit because it's a pretty large exhibit. And it takes about 3 or 4 hours to take down. And then, of course, everything has to go in a truck, and we are taking it to our next host site. So there's usually only a 2-3 day turnaround between when we take, probably less than that, probably a 2-day turnaround between when we take down one exhibit and we install the next exhibit. And then some pictures I included. So that's part of the exhibit right there. That was in Becker. And then on the left was the are often working on how to improve the content, the exhibit content. So one thing that we decided to include is that some information about wastewater treatment plants. So we had one of our contractors, make a model of a wastewater treatment plant, and so we were able to build a stand-in now this wastewater treatment model that's in the photo that I think Paul Andre was working on that in this picture. But that exhibit piece is now on display at Augsburg. I think it got debuted for the first time at Becker, so we prepped it in time for 2023. And so again, there's a lot of that process that really goes into making We Are Water successful. And so I just wanted to share kind of some of the context as to how much work this exhibit takes, because I don't think there's really enough visibility and appreciation about that. And so I want to talk more about the local content. So over the course of multiple months, we collaborate with our host sites on a rolling schedule to develop the exhibit content. And so we have 4 main areas. So we have our local content. So this is usually information about our each of our host site regions. So like geography, specific water features, so like rivers, bodies of water, lakes, etc. And kind of some more information about like what are some things going on with water in that specific region. So I'm thinking, for example, so for our next host site, Roseau, they're in a unique biome called the tall like aspen parklands, I think. And so that was something that would be included on the local content. So more of that information about like what's happening with the water in that community. Then we also will be included. So I write the inspiration stories, and so these are stories about we choose usually 6 community members who work around water, and we feature them as part of an inspiration story to get people, inspired and more aware about what they do around water and kind of their relationship with water. And so we kind of choose the inspiration stories to help be representative of some of the community members in the region. We also have audio features, and so we have 2 areas where audio is featured from our host sites. We have a little area with buttons and headphones where you can listen to 4 stories, 4 audio features from each of our host sites. We also have a touchscreen feature that is usually a map, so you can zoom in and out and like click the stories and listen to them. And so our edited audio features, which are about 2 to 3 minutes long, are featured there. We also have a farm profile, which highlights a farmer from the community who is part of the Minnesota Agricultural Water Quality Certification Program, which helps preserve water quality through farming in Minnesota. And again, sometimes we end up doing an extra step in with some of this content. So, for example, this picture here is from our current exhibit at Augsburg University at the Somali Museum, Minnesota, where we ended up creating a website with their stories because they had less than a usual amount of interviewees, and we wanted to highlight them, and we also realized that we needed to connect the interviews a little bit more with Somali culture, just because there needed to be some more context for these stories if we were going to feature all of them. So this was a good option where we were able to feature some information about Somali culture and the community in Minneapolis, and interview them with some of the audio features that we gathered from the community. And so, yeah. So again, like I mentioned before, I specifically work on the inspiration stories. And so this involves me listening to all of the interviews that are collected. So we usually aim between our communities submitting 15 to 20 interviews to like having 15 to 20 community members interviewed. And so this number can range. So like for Somali Museum, they only did 10 interviews just because they wanted to, take the time, focus on a smaller amount of people. And also they wanted the time to get translators and have focus more on on collecting the interviewees. So, but then also on the other hand, we've had for one host site, we had over 30 stories that were collected as part of We Are Water. So this number can vary the range, and we can do different things depending on different numbers. And we usually, when we get to, we can't feature everyone who is interviewed in all the aspects. You do all get featured as part of the map, but that's the only area where every single interviewee is featured. So again, these are the ones from the past two exhibits. So these were all ones I wrote. So we have an inspiration story here. These are the small museum ones in the yellow, and then there's the one from Pine River, which I showed before. And so I want to talk about maybe one of my favorite things that happens with We Are Water when I end up working on some of the content that I work on is that I go into these multi-hour research binges because oftentimes I'm learning a lot about water that I don't really know previously. And so much really varies depending on what's going on. So for an example, so I'm currently working on the inspiration stories for our fourth host site, Roseau. And there was an older gentleman. He was talking about fur trapping up in the Roseau River watershed. And what happens is that he was talking specifically about mink. And I knew nothing about mink fur trapping and that. So I went on, I was like researching about minks. And so he was mentioning the hunting season. And so I was looking up the like hunting regulations for Minnesota in 2022 to like, you know, see, okay, like what is he talking about? Get more familiar. He also mentioned going, so part of the Rosa River, a lot of it is modified due to farming practices. And so what happens that because the river often changes is that he talks about fishing in these oxbows. So again, so kind of the curves of the rivers, but specifically the ones that are often separated when the river changes shape. And so they're really shallow water and they're apparently great fishing. And so it's really these like research that I end up doing for each of the host sites about, some of the specific stories. They often mention like very specific things that happen within the region that, I don't really know about, specifically since I've really only lived in two areas of Minnesota the past 5 years I've lived here, in Northfield, Minnesota, and in the Twin Cities afterwards. And so again, this is something that I really appreciate as part of my time at We Are Water is being able to really get a lot more information about water from a lot of different people and different stories because none of the other interviews from any of the other areas talked specifically about mink fur trapping. But this one did, and I'm not sure if I'm going to see it for our last host site when I work on that content later this month. And so this information kind of goes into some of my other work. So I run the social media accounts for We Are Water on Facebook and Twitter. So I am posting about the program and some of the happenings within the program. But then also another component that I do is that we also have a podcast called The Watershed where we feature our audio stories. And so the reason originally why The Watershed was started as a part of We Are Water is that with our interviews, we have so many people who are interviewed, and not everyone can get featured. Even though we have all of the areas that people can get featured, with the inspiration stories, the audio files, it can be really hard to try and, you know, you can't really feature everyone. So oftentimes, especially when you're with some of the interviews, is that oftentimes multiple similar themes come up around specific things with water. So like we had multiple interviews from one host site about aquatic invasive species monitoring, or we had one host site that interviewed multiple teachers, and so who talked about water and how that related to what they're working on as teachers. And so the watershed is a place that we can highlight more of the interviews and more of the stories that end up getting cut or not getting as much, feature time in the exhibit because of the way we have to cut things when we develop the content. And so the watershed, I have to write all the episodes. I also have to listen to the interviews, which they're usually between 30 minutes and an hour long each. So that's a lot of time to listen to them. And then I have to do the entire editing process, which again can look something like this. So this was one of the Pine River episodes. We also have an episode coming out for our first episode for Samoa Museum coming out tomorrow. So I have to finish editing that as well today. And so a lot of my time is often spent, recording myself and listening and improving my editing skills and working on figuring out, okay, what parts of interviews do I feature? And how do I create an intriguing narrative that really highlights the people who took the time out of their days to get interviewed as part of We Are Water. And so that's something that I find really interesting about my work is being able to figure out, okay, what kinds of narratives can I choose? Because that's something that I can help, at least in collaboration with our host sites, I can help highlight some of those. Um, Another thing I wanted to highlight is that I do a docent training for each of our host sites. And so, since our exhibit operates as we are a traveling museum exhibit, we follow a training. So, a docent for a museum is a volunteer that helps, talks to people about maybe some of the artwork or some of the museum exhibits and gets them talking and more engaged with the exhibit itself. So I run the docent training. And so what I'm doing is that oftentimes for volunteers who are coming into the program, like volunteers who are associated with the host site and they're like, I don't really know what's going on with this We Are Water thing, but they need volunteers. So I'm going to show up to this training in order to be more familiar and be a good volunteer with the exhibit. So oftentimes I'm familiarizing people with the content of the We Are Water program. And then I'm also introducing people to some of the content. So right here, this is a picture of me doing the docent training. So we usually do a presentation and then we do a tour of the exhibit where I show everyone all the interactive things like games. Oftentimes there's games where there's written content, where there's interactive things. So I'm working with this What You Flush Matters, or I think it's renamed to What Goes Down the Drain Matters. And so what happens is that you have a magnetic piece and you put it on a little stand and the screen switches with the sensor and it shows a fact about something that goes down the drain that doesn't get filtered by a wastewater treatment plant. So like dyes, salt from chloride, etc. And so this is really important because we do this every single time we move the exhibit, and it really helps get the community and get the our host sites really interested in some of the stuff that is going with the program. Another part I do is that I work with our community outreach events. So for this portion, I'm actually going to share my, share my screen, I think, and show a video from our Pine River hosting. So I'm going to share that real quick. So I'm going to turn off my video and I'm going to play this.
Our Water Minnesota offered free nitrate testing for well water this past Saturday in Pine River. Over 70 residents participated in the clinic, including reporter Charlie Yeager, who learned more about the effects of elevated nitrate levels for this week's Northwoods Experience.
Mason jars, water bottles, and the like, filled with the drinking water of Lakes area residents, waiting to be tested for nitrate.
The testing today is free, and people should have their water tested periodically, and many don't, whether it's just not knowing that you should, or it could be cost prohibitive, so it's neat to offer it for free.
The process for testing begins by labeling the sealed containers for tracking.
Then it's passed to the next person to actually process the sample. We take just about 3 ounces of water in a small cup. We add a little bit of hydrochloric acid, which just prevents a little bit of scaling in our machine. Then we put it in a spectrophotometer, so pour it into the flask, gravity feeds into the machine. Once it's there, it gets into a small capsule, and then light waves are shot through the sample.
The more nitrate in the water, the less light that gets through. The machine then gives the results of the screening in parts per million.
We're on a scale of 0 to 10, then 10 plus. Levels of 0 to 3 parts per million is natural background levels. Nitrate is a naturally occurring compound in both our groundwater and soils. So anything between 0 to 3 is normal. Once we get to 4 to 7, then we start to think that there might be an outside source.
Lawn fertilizer, pesticides, septic tanks, and animal waste are some of the biggest culprits.
And once you're 8 to 10, that's where things really get concerning. So you definitely would like to have it professionally tested. If it's still high, then consider alternative drinking water sources or have your system treated.
And We Are Water Minnesota is dedicated to helping those who already have issues, as well as educating the community.
People do have a lot of concerns about their water. We want to have drinkable, swimmable, fishable water, lakes, rivers. All of our choices impact someone, whether it's us or a next generation or, a neighbor, a friend. When you care about something, you want to do better for it. And I would say that that is part of what the exhibit is really sharing with folks. And hopefully it's different choices that we make past that.
Reporting in Pine River for this week's Northwoods Experience, Charlie Yeager, Lakeland News.
That event was held at the Happy Turtle in Pine River, Happy Dancing Turtle, I should say. If you're interested in having your water tested professionally, you can visit the Minnesota Department of Health's website for a list of testing labs near you.
So here, I'm going to turn my screen back on. So yeah, so that was, if you probably didn't notice, I was in the video, so I was doing the nitrate testing. So that is one of our water stewardship options that we offer as part of We Are Water to our host site communities. And so we have a traveling nitrate test that we can, a nitrate testing machine from the Department of Agriculture. And so in the video, I was working with Jen Schaust, who is one of our We Are Water partners from the Department of Agriculture. And the executive director of the nonprofit we worked with, Quinn, was also featured in that video. And that was one of my favorite community outreach events, mostly because I wasn't sure what it was going to be like because, and what happened is that we did over 70 tests there on that day, which was an insane amount considering that we were only there for about 3 hours doing testing. And so one of the other staff members from that nonprofit, he works for the Crow Wing Soil and Water Conservation District. And he said for that entire county, they only had done 160 tests approximately for the entire year. And then in one event, we got 70 tests done. And so it kind of was really like, oh, wow, that's a really big impact considering that the actual SWC, one of the SWCDs that many people who are in that community are a part of, they had been, that they offer multiple tests a year and they just hadn't really had that capacity. And so being there for a lot of the community events that We Are Water is hosting or helping plan some of those really does mean a lot in terms of seeing what kind of impact the water has, because so many of the people, they weren't really interested in seeing the exhibit itself, but when they saw the water testing in the shopper at the grocery store, they made the time on a Saturday to come and drop off their water and get it tested. So again, I want to talk about some of the programming that I offered and created as part of this. So one thing I did, so this was also in Pine River, is that I worked on developing a soil health lesson plan as a workshop that we offer. So in order to help our host sites with their programming, we offer host workshop options that a host site can take. It's a lesson plan. We have items that they can like rent out or lend, and we can, show that they can use that as part of their hosting. So I developed this soil health lesson plan because we work within a lot of heavy agricultural communities in the state. And, we have some exhibit content that is, represented that's agricultural focused in the exhibit, but then, we didn't really have any workshop options that were focused on agriculture. So this was one where it kind of aligns with the Minnesota water quality testing program, with that water quality program I mentioned earlier, and talks a lot about. So as much of my year was spent developing this lesson because soil health is really complicated. And I had to do a couple different things where I had to figure out, okay, what this is aimed for middle schoolers. And so what makes, what is fun for middle schoolers? What are some of the basic concepts about like what is soil, what is soil health, and how can I like communicate that in an accessible way to students? And then finally, being able to connect that back to some of the We Are Water. So as part of our content, we have farm profiles and which we use for each of our host sites. We have a farm profile created, but then we have all these farm profiles, once they're created, we don't really do anything with them. So I utilized the information from the farm profiles and connected it to some of the activities. And so, again, with the activity here in the photo, with the final lesson plan, I was able to, we have some soil samples from the Department of Agriculture where, you can add soil. I have these test tubes that talk about different things that are living and not living in soil. So like part of the living stuff was that I made these little polymer microbes on the top and then just like critters on the bottom. So like worms, ladybugs, pillbugs, that sort of deal. And so this was a really fun opportunity to be able to develop this lesson over the course of multiple months and then host it with Pine River, because the nonprofit we were working with, Happy Dancing Turtle, does a lot of educational programming with the children. That's one of the primary things that they do. And so I was really interested to be really in their world and be a part of their programming that they did. They had around 700 school kids go and visit the exhibit, which is an insane amount considering that the town itself is only about 900 people that the exhibit was in. And so I wanted to include a couple other pictures. So we often are working, we have an opening reception for each of our communities. So I know this is Britt and I, and as well as at Pine River, Britt Gagnes and I. And then also, you know, we're able to get a big community turnout. So depending on the host site. And so there, I think the founder of the nonprofit for Happy Dancing Turtle was there, as well as his dog was hanging out with us. And then also, you know, I am often helping actively plan sort of things. So with our current hosting with Somali Museum of Minnesota, early on, our partner for that, our original coordinator for Somali Museum, she was like, I really want to do a river cleanup. And I specifically also she wanted a reflective activity to go with the river cleanup, because she's like, a lot of people don't really take the time to be close to the river and enjoy it. So what we did was that we partnered with 2 5th grade classes at a local school in Minneapolis that was really close to the museum itself, and also close to Augsburg, where the exhibit's currently being held. And so we worked with the teachers and we organized a field trip. So much of what I was doing was sending out emails, you know, connecting communication, you know, getting volunteers, getting supplies, etc. And then on the Somali Museum side, they invited, the coordinator invited a local artist who had ended up, Ben Weaver, who ended up biking. I think one of his main things that he did was that he biked from St. Paul down to New Orleans along the Mississippi River, and he writes a lot of music around water. And so this was a really great activity where to start their hosting, where we were able to work with kids. And at least for me, one of the things I was really excited is that we were right along, that's the Mississippi River in that photo. And so that was just a really cool aspect. And so I'm starting to run out of time. Actually, I'm further along than I thought I was. So again, get to do a lot of community programming. And so I'm going to transition more into my work with the smart salting, because that's another area where I do a lot of community programming. And so one of the things I majorly do with Brooke and Shandy, who are both on this call, is that I work on this smart salting for community leaders presentation and workshop. So what this was developed in partnership. This was developed last year by the GreenCorps member who was before me, Megan. And this is kind of filling a niche in the both kind of overlaps the audience we get for We Are Water and the audience for smart salting, where the smart salting program, a lot of the you know, classes and offerings from that program are for industry people who work with chloride pollution and you know, and are oftentimes needing the more technical information. But there was a need for people who are community leaders, such as like, you know, watershed districts, local governments, residents, like in like active in groups and things like that, people who are on housing boards, to learn more about chloride pollution and a lot of the different resources that are offered, but not from as deep of a technical standpoint as the majority of smart salting classes. So this program was developed last year, and I, you know, am able to continue facilitating this program. So we did 4 of these smart salting for community leaders workshops that were virtual. And so with this in mind, this was a really interesting experience to be able to, this is a 2-hour workshop that I am the main speaker for. And so this was a real test on my public speaking skills. And so being able to figure out, okay, what's the pacing? How do I manage, you know, the different changes and things like that? And also just the audience, where so many of the people that are in the audience just they really want to learn more about chloride pollution and what specifics they can do. So like specific policies, specific education and outreach resources, specific information that they could share with their people that they connect with. And so this was something that I really enjoyed doing, just because this was a lot different from some of the other community engagement work that I was doing with We Are Water. And so it kind of fit in nicely with what I was doing, and doing something a lot more structured and doing something that really did go pretty information heavy was something that was really interesting to me. And I think also with this program, we, you know, are able to work on developing, you know, we talk not just about road salt, which is a major source of salt pollution, but we also talk about water softeners and fertilizers. So it's kind of giving more, again, it really does give a good overview as to many of the different resources and many of the different like concerns that you might want to have about salt pollution. So oftentimes a lot of the examples we include as success stories are around water softeners and road salt, because again, when we share the stories and we share the resource, it's, depending on what you want to do and where you want to reduce chloride, you need a lot of different resources and a lot of different aid and information in order to do that. And so, yeah, and so that's something that I really enjoyed doing during my time with GreenCorps. And so some other projects I am working on. So I've been working on these smart salting success stories. And so we have success stories as part of the statewide chloride management plan. And so what we were originally aiming to do was that the end goal at least is to eventually have a story map website where we can share all the different success stories from across the state of Minnesota where people have successfully reduced their chloride pollution. But for now, I was able to kind of create this layout and create a template where people can, where partners who are looking to reduce their salt, they can start tracking, okay, what are their goals? Where are they reducing salt, kind of tracking their numbers. And then also ended up getting a feature where we can talk about, okay, like, what did the city of Morris do to reduce their chloride in their wastewater? And being able to communicate that more clearly to the general public, and have that more centered as part of the smart salting program. I'm also working on developing a handbook based on the smart salting for community leaders presentation that could help kind of synthesize. There we go. I know how to speak English. Synthesize a lot of the information. And so another thing I did was that one of my favorite things I also did was teaching about salt pollution to children. So one of the first things I did was that myself, Brooke, Shandy, and one other person, we went to the Metro Children's Water Festival in St. Paul in September, and we taught a lesson about chloride pollution. And this was a great lesson. We take buckets and we add salt and we do measuring with conductivity tests, and we teach children how to map data and what happens. But I created a tabling version of this lesson using something called an Enviroscape, which I have pictured here. And we were invited. I was invited by a former We Are Water partner to their their water festival up in Grand Rapids in May. And so I was able to facilitate this lesson with a bunch of kids, which was super exciting and super fun. We basically, with the Enviroscape, you add pollutants on it and then you spray it off, and it runs into like bodies of water, shows how a watershed operates, which is a really great way to visualize like how watersheds work. And so this was really fun because so many of the kids said that it was their favorite activity of the day because, you get messy, you allow them to go crazy. And at least for that moment, it really kind of shared, okay, like, how do you stay flexible in the moment? And at least for me, I had never done this lesson before. And I had 7 groups of children who ended up seeing this lesson. So over the course of each of those 7 groups, I was able to think better, okay, like, how do I engage them? What works, doesn't work? So it's really like, when you're doing something rapid fire like that with that lesson, you really get a lot of time to really like think about, okay, what do you need to do in order to make this successful and impactful for children? So I would say that's one of my biggest successes with the program. And so to kind of finish off, here are some of the kind of the main takeaways as to what I've learned during my time with Minnesota GreenCorps and with my time with We Are Water and chloride reduction. I learned, again, a lot about water and really like a better appreciation of water, but I also learned a lot about Minnesota itself and the many different communities that are part of it. Again, like I mentioned before, I'd only really lived in Northfield and Minneapolis before, with this program, and before this program, I really kind of had a limited understanding of water that was, fairly constrained by my life experience. And basically, I was able to visit like a ton of different places. I'm sorry. Great, of course, right when my med talks ends, I get a bad cough. But 1 second. Okay, well, this is a great ending, but yeah, and so that was something where being able to be exposed to different types of water. I also just really developed a better appreciation for working with children. It was something I was really nervous about entering my my term, and it was something that I really, really enjoyed, was working with the children that I worked with, and also just working with other community members I loved working with our host site partners, and it was really great being able to constantly work with them and talk with them and learn more about their community and like how they wanted their hosting of We Are Water to go. Um, I also just kind of developed more of appreciation for the role of agriculture in Minnesota. So I primarily grew up in urban communities. And so it was something I really didn't like have an appreciation for until I started working with some of our partners in the Department of Agriculture and working in these really heavy agricultural communities. And so that was something I also really enjoyed. On a more general note, I really kind of learned how to navigate changes within the workplace. We've had a lot of different changes with We Are Water recently in the past year, with the structure of the program, with staff who have changed from our various host sites, and also within our state partners. And so being able to navigate the change and kind of like, kind of being able to be a consistent figure within the We Are Water program for the entire year was something that was really helpful in learning how to do that. And I think also like practicing, time management and also just being able to better advocate for myself in workplaces was something that I really appreciated learning. And again, while again, I'm a recent graduate of college. I recently graduated college last year, and while I've had a lot of work experience within college, this is really my first full-time position after college. And so, being able to have this transition time where I'm able to work on two insanely cool programs that really work with water and protect water. And especially with We Are Water, where it helps, develop community capacity. Being able to work within the communities is something that has been really meaningful and exciting for me. So, but yeah. But anyway, I just wanted to say if you're in the Twin Cities metro area, come visit the We Are Water exhibit at Augsburg. It's open on Tuesday through Fridays from noon to 7 and on Saturdays from 10 to 2. With it's open there until August. And so we're also going to be up in Roseland, Minnesota, so really far up north if you're outside of the metro area or if you're in northern Minnesota. And we'll also be back in Stillwater in the fall starting in October. And yeah, thank you everyone for so much for taking the time to come to the talk. It really does mean a lot to be able to kind of encompass my whole experience and talk about it and talk about all the work that I've really enjoyed doing over the past year. So thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Arden, for sharing all of your work. It's always fun I don't get to hear a whole lot about your We Are Water work because we've always got so much chloride work to do.
Yeah.
So it's a really fun opportunity to learn more about the other part of your work. And I know we are right at 10 o'clock. So I don't know, Arden, if you have a few minutes to stick around.
I can stick around and yeah, I can answer any questions or anything. So I can keep an eye on the chat. I know Shandy commented about the nitrate testing, but yeah. Cool. Well, thank you, everyone.
Yeah, you certainly made everybody a little bit jealous of your work, I think. There's a lot of different cool things you've gotten to work on and all of those experiences. I think that it all sounded very interesting and fun and a wonderful opportunity for you to grow into your kind of professional career. So that's...
Yeah. Again, it's such a fun stuff. And again, like it's interesting like hearing about like other people in GreenCorps and they do a lot, oftentimes they're doing a lot more technical stuff and they're like, oh, I do like all the tree plantings or solar panel monitoring and things like that. And I'm like, that's some really important work. But then I'm also like, well, I get to work on a podcast episode today as part of it. So it's just an interesting this again with this. I know there's other GreenCorps members who are going to be sharing about their work later on as part of the water talks. Yeah, I think just working with We Are Water is just such a unique experience. So yeah. But if there's any questions or if anyone wants more information about We Are Water, just shoot a question. So, but yeah.
Great. Well, if there are no questions from the group, we can go ahead and conclude the meeting. And yes, as Arden mentioned, we will have a few more GreenCorps members coming up over the next couple of talks that we're going to offer. So please come back and learn more about the exciting work that they're working on as well. It's always great to hear from our GreenCorps members and get a little sneak peek into some of the great work that they get to do and learn more about the great program. Think about all of the impact that Arden has had, and there's about 50 GreenCorps members out there that are doing different work in different ways that's having a similar impact on our communities and the environment and our programs. So, so great to have that wonderful GreenCorps program available to us here in Minnesota. All right, well, thank you everyone for being here. If you do have any questions for Arden, she has a
Yes.
email address, so you can
Awesome.
just go ahead and email her. Just let her know if you have any follow-up questions. But thanks again, Arden, for taking
Yes.
time out of your busy schedule and
Oh,
being
yeah.
here with us today and sharing your work. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brooke. Thank you, Brooke, for inviting me and some of the other GreenCorps members to speak about it, speak about our work. It's a really great opportunity. Like I said before, I don't really get to share about the full capacity of my work really at any point. Like, how was it? Back in we had a retreat in March for when our 2023 host sites kicked off. And I mentioned just offhandedly about my smart salting work, and then like one of our host site partners, she was just not familiar with chloride pollution at all. So she's like, "Wait, what are you talking about?" And it was funny because then I was like, talked about it for like 5-10 minutes, and I'm like, I would have talked more about it, but then what was it? But then we had to keep going with our agenda for that thing. So it's just kind of funny where I think there's parts of my work that really like depending on who I'm talking to, like you don't get to see the We Are Water side as much sometimes, and then other people don't get to see the smart salting side as much sometimes with working with me. So, but yeah. So again, just kind of nice to have like a full picture moment. So, but yeah. So
Awesome. Well, thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us today. And we'll see you in 2 weeks. I think we've got another one here and we'll hear from another GreenCorps member. So thanks again. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.